Accuplacer prep for factoring. This will be probably one of 2 or 3 videos, just to keep them short. Factoring, basic factoring. First thing we always look for is something called the GCF, or the greatest common factor. Now, GCF can be either a letter or a variable. So what is a GCF? When we look at this expression, I look at the 3x and I look at the 9. I look at the terms. Is there something common that can be factored out of both? And the answer is yes. I can divide both of these by 3, because that's what when you factor something out is, you are dividing by it. So what I divide by comes to the front. 3x divided by 3 leaves you 1x, and 9 divided by 3 leaves you 3. So a GCF can be a number, it can be a variable, because looking at this term, I have an x squared and an x. Both terms have the same letter, so that means I can divide or factor out the lowest exponent, which is a 1. So typically we do not write that power of 1, but I'm doing it more for a visualization. When we divide exponents, they subtract. What I divide by comes to the front. So 3x squared divided by x to the first, that means 2 minus 1 leaves me 1. So it leaves me 3x to the first power. Sign comes over. 4x divided by x, these guys are going to cancel, leaving me just 4. So a GCF can be a number, a letter, or both. Because looking at this, I can take a 3 and an x out of both. So again, what I divide by comes to the front. 3 divided by 3 cancels. X squared divided by x to the first leaves me a plain x. Bring the sign over. 9x divided by 3x leaves me plain old 3. GCF. All right. The next thing, the type of factoring I'm going to look at and do a quick explanation of, is something called grouping. We do that when we have 4 terms. To group, you have 4 terms. We literally break it in half. First 2 terms, second 2 terms. And I ignore the second 2 terms. I look only at the first 2. And I look at that, and I look at the first 2 terms and say, okay, what is my GCF? I see a 3x. Again, when I divide by, comes to the front. What's left over goes inside. So 9x squared divided by 3x gives me 3x. Sign drops. 6x divided by 3x leaves me a 2. All right. I now move to the second half. And I'm looking at this. Again, I'm going to look at GCFs, but I'm not just going to look at GCFs now. I'm also going to look at signs, because look at this. I need a minus, and if I do this, I have a plus. So I see a minus here. I need a positive front. So that tells me I need to take out a negative. I also see a 6 and a 4, so I'm taking out a negative 2. Y divided by comes to the front. A negative divided by negative gives me a positive. 6x divided by 2 gives me a 3x. Positive divided by negative gives me a negative. 4 divided by 2 gives me 2. At this point, I look at this, and my parentheses are the same. This is what the goal is, because next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this and say, hey, guess what? I can make a GCF of the parentheses. So again, what I divide by comes to the front. What I'm left behind with goes in the next parentheses. So I took a 4 term, factored it by grouping, by taking it in chunks and finding the GCF of each piece. Parentheses being the same, I pulled out the parentheses. What's left over goes in the next. This is grouping. All right. Let's look at another one. And fold the paper down. Okay, 6x squared minus 10xy minus 12x plus 20y. Well, we have a GCF of all 4 terms. Don't forget, you can do that. I can take a 2 out of everybody. Now, I still have my 4 terms. My focus is going to be inside the brackets. So again, I'm going to split them. I look at the front half, and I see an X and an X. So I know my one GCF has an X. I look at a 3 and a 5. There's no common numbers. So my GCF at the front is an X. Now, 3x squared divided by x leaves me 3x. 5xy divided by x leaves me a negative 5y. I looked at the back. Again, I got to keep an eye on signs also, because I need these signs to flip. So it means I need to take a negative out. This has an x, this has a y. So my GCF isn't a letter, but I see a 6 and 10, so I'm going to take out a negative 2. So negative divided by negative gives me my positive. 6x divided by 2 gives me a 3x. A positive divided by negative is a negative. 10y divided by 2 gives me 5y. Now, I cannot forget this 2. Still focusing on inside brackets. These guys are the same. So I'm going to kind of do it a little bit quicker. I pull them out. What's left over goes inside the next. This guy's not forgotten. He just needs to be dropped. So here, we grouped again. If you're still needing help, there are more videos. Again, I keep referencing that, but there's also the worksheet, guys. Go practice. Bye.